The rubble breathed. At least that was how Reed Calloway described it later. Like the whole broken pile of concrete and burned steel was pulling air in and pushing it out, slow and deep, just under the sound of the wind. He almost kept walking. His boots were caked with ash. His shoulder ached from the pack. The rest of his unit was already 200 meters ahead, moving toward the extraction point, and Commander Orvath's voice had just crackled through the radio, telling everyone to close up the column and stop dragging their feet. The demolition charges were set. Firebase Dunn had 20 minutes left before it became a crater. Reed stopped. He turned and looked back at the collapsed storage block. The roof had caved in during the shelling 2 days ago. Coalition engineers had walked through it, checked for salvage, marked it empty, and moved on. Every soldier in the unit had passed within 10 meters of that pile and kept walking. Reed stood there, listening. The sound was not quite a cry. It was not quite a sound at all. It sat somewhere below hearing, in the part of the chest that tightens before you know why. He had felt it once before, in a collapsed building on a different planet, when a child had been buried under 3 floors of rubble, and every scanner said the structure was empty. He pulled off his pack and climbed over the broken edge of the wall. Inside, under 2 crossed beams and a sheet of bent metal, he found it. It was small, no bigger than a large dog, curled tight into the corner where 2 walls still met, using the angle for warmth. Its scales were the color of deep gold with violet running through them like veins in stone, catching even the dim light of Saratha's IV's permanent twilight and holding it. One wing was spread wrong, pinned under the beam, the membrane torn and dark at the edges. There was a wound along its flank that had been bleeding and had stopped, and that was not a good sign. It opened one eye. Reed did not move. He had seen a lot of things in 8 years of frontier service. He had never seen a Veyrath. Most soldiers hadn't. Most species hadn't. The old records called them mythological until about 30 years ago, and even now there were fewer confirmed sightings than there were planets in the coalition. He also knew, in the very simple and direct way that the body knows things before the brain catches up, that this creature was very young and very scared and very close to dying. He crouched down slowly, the way you crouch when you want something frightened to understand you are not a threat. "Hey," he said, "I've got you." The creature's eye tracked him. It did not move. The wing twitched once, and it made a sound then, finally, low and cracked and exhausted. Reed felt it in his sternum like a struck bell. He unclipped his radio. "Dara, hold the demo charges." A pause, then Dara's voice, flat with the particular flatness of someone choosing their words carefully. "Sergeant, Commander Orvath has given the order to hold the charges. 20 minutes doesn't start until I say it starts." He clipped the radio back. He opened his pack and pulled out the field medkit. He did not have anything designed for whatever biology this creature ran on. He had bandage wrap, antiseptic foam, 2 kinds of painkiller he wasn't going to risk, and clean water. He started with the beam. It took 4 minutes to shift it without causing more damage to the wing. He talked the whole time, low and steady, nothing important, just words to fill the air between them. The creature watched him. It stopped making the broken sound. It did not try to move away. When the beam was off, he looked at the wing. Bad, but not gone. The tear was clean on one edge and ragged on the other, the kind of injury that could heal if it was kept clean and still. The wound on the flank was infected. He could see the heat coming off it even in the cold air. He used the antiseptic foam and wrapped the wing as gently as he knew how, which was not gently enough, and the creature flinched twice but did not pull away. Then it did something he didn't expect. It pressed its head forward and rested it against his knee. Reed sat very still. The weight of it was real. The warmth of it was real. He put one hand on the side of its neck, careful, and the scales were smoother than they looked, and he felt something that had no name, not a voice, not a word, just a presence, like a door opening somewhere behind his eyes. He picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. He adjusted his pack and put the creature inside, leaving the top open so it could breathe, its head resting on the rim and its eyes half closed. He climbed back out of the rubble and started walking toward the column. His radio came on. Orvath, Calloway, status. Moving to extraction, sir. A breath. I picked something up. The silence on the other end lasted a long time. Reed kept walking. Behind him, Firebase Dunn stood for 17 more minutes before the charges took it down in a low, rolling crash. He didn't look back. He had what he came for. He didn't know yet what he had started. Rinna had 4 arms and the bedside manner of a rock. She was good at her job. Nobody disputed that. She had kept people alive in conditions that should have been obituaries, and she approached every injury with the cold precision of someone who had long ago decided that feeling things was a separate activity to be done later, off the clock. She looked at what Reed set down on her examination table and said nothing for 5 full seconds. I don't know what that is, she said finally. Veyrath hatchling, Reed said. Wing tear and flank infection. I've already done primary wrap on the wing. The infection is what I'm worried about. I don't know what that is, she said again. She meant the species. Nobody does, Reed said. That's why I need you to figure it out. She told him, in exact and efficient language, that she was a coalition field medic, not a xenobiologist, that her medical database had 17 entries on Veyrath physiology and 12 of them were marked speculative, and that she was not in the habit of treating creatures whose biology she did not understand. Reed sat down on the stool beside the table. Okay, he said. He opened his own field kit. I'll start. You tell me when I'm wrong. She stared at him. She was not used to being answered that way. The infection, he said, pulling out the antiseptic foam. Heat, discoloration, swelling around the edges. Same signs across species in my experience. Clean it. Pull out anything that doesn't belong. Close it if it wants to be closed. Rinna looked at the wound. She leaned in, closer than she had come before, and her professional instincts quietly took over the argument her brain had been making. She reached out with one of her secondary hands and pressed gently at the edge of the wound. Sable Reed had not named it yet, but he would, in about 6 hours, made a low sound and turned its head to look at her. Rinna did not step back. She pressed again, reading the tissue the way she had read 1,000 wounds before. Debris inside, she said, her voice shifting into its working register, looks like concrete dust and something organic, probably been there since the shelling. She reached for her own kit. This is going to take a while. I've got time, Reed said. Commander Orvath did not feel the same way. He came to the medic station an hour later, stood in the doorway, and looked at the scene. Reed sitting beside the table. Rinna bent over the wound with a set of extraction tools, the gold and violet creature lying with unusual stillness, and he breathed out once through his nose, which for a Dreth was the equivalent of a very long sentence. Calloway. Sir. That creature was logged by 3 separate units as non-essential fauna. It was not our responsibility. No, sir. You delayed demolition. 17 minutes, sir, within operational tolerance. Orvath's mandibles shifted. He was not a cruel being. He was a practical one, and there was a difference, though it didn't always feel like one. It is to be handed to wildlife relocation at the next supply drop. That is an order. Understood, sir. He left. Reed did not file the handover request. By the 3rd hour, Rinna had cleaned the wound, closed it with 2 types of bonding agent used experimentally, and declared that she had no idea if any of what she'd done was correct, but that the creature's core temperature had dropped to a stable range, which she chose to interpret as a good sign. Farrow, the youngest in the unit, had been quietly sitting in the corner of the station for most of that time. Nobody had told him to be there. Nobody had told him to leave either. He had his field reader out, and he'd been digging through archives. Veyrath, he said, without looking up. The word doesn't mean what we think it means. Reed looked over. What does it mean? The oldest records, pre-coalition, some kind of xenolinguistic archive, translated as those who witnessed the first breaking. Not a species name, more like a title. He looked up. His face was doing something uncertain. There's a note on the record that says it's unverified mythology, but it's a consistent translation across 4 different source languages. Nobody said anything for a moment. The creature, not yet named Sable, but about to be, turned its head and looked at Pharaoh with one eye. Pharaoh looked back. He seemed faintly unsettled, in the way people get when something looks at them and seems to understand what they just said. That night, Reed sat against the supply crates with the creature curled beside him. Its breathing was steadier. The wound had not reopened. It had eaten a small amount of dried protein ration, which Reed was reasonably sure was the wrong food, but which it had accepted without complaint. It pressed the side of its head against his arm. Reed felt it again, that presence, that sense of a door standing open. No words, no images yet, just the undeniable feeling of something alive choosing to be next to him specifically out of all the people in that camp, for reasons it could not explain and he could not ask about. He looked down at the scales, gold and violet in the low lamplight. "Sable," he said quietly, testing it. The creature's eye opened halfway, one slow blink. Reed nodded. "Okay, Sable." He did not sleep well that night, but for the first time in longer than he could pin down, the sleeplessness felt like it was about something worth being awake for. 7 days out from Firebase Dun, the convoy was moving through Sarath's IV's interior, a long, slow roll of supply vehicles across a landscape that looked like the planet had given up on being habitable and was just going through the motions. Black rock, pale sky, the occasional tree that had decided to grow sideways rather than argue with the volcanic wind. Sable sat in the back of Reed's transport with its chin on the vehicle wall and watched the world go by. Its wing was healing. Rinna had checked it twice, and both times made the specific sound she made when something surprised her, a short exhale through the nose, and said nothing further, which Reed had learned to read as approval. The wound on the flank had closed cleanly. The infected heat was gone. Sable was eating properly now, not ration packs. Pharaoh had figured out, through a combination of archive research and cautious experimentation, that the creature did well with raw protein in small amounts and seemed to drink more than it ate. It was growing, slowly but visibly. The gold in its scales had deepened. The violet ran brighter in certain lights, almost iridescent. Bodhi, who was large and quiet, and generally only spoke when something was actually worth saying, had begun bringing it water without being asked. He didn't make a thing of it. He would just set the container down and walk away, and Sable would drink without acknowledging him, and that was, somehow, their relationship. Reed knew what Orvath had ordered. He also knew the next supply drop was in 4 days, and the wildlife relocation unit that was supposed to receive Sable did not yet know to expect anything. He was not in a hurry to correct that gap in their information. Dara slid into the seat beside him without announcing herself, which was normal. She had a look on her face that Reed recognized as the preface to something he didn't want to hear. "Word came through back channels," she said. "Someone on Orvath's staff filed a report about Sable." Reed kept his eyes forward. "Filed it where?" "High Warden's office, Tilek." The name was not one Reed knew well, but the title was enough. High Warden meant coalition oversight. It meant civilian authority over military field decisions. It meant someone with access to laws that soldiers didn't write and couldn't easily argue with. "What's Tilek coming for officially?" Reed asked. "Post-offensive assessment. Sarath's IV is on the disputed territory list. He has every reason to be here that doesn't involve us." Dara paused. "His office has already contacted a xenobiology facility. Off-world, there is apparently a transport being arranged." Reed said nothing. Dara said, "Reed, I heard you. What are you going to do?" He didn't answer right away. He looked back through the transport to where Sable had pulled its chin off the wall and was now looking at him directly. Not in the way animals look at the people who feed them. In the way that made the back of his neck prickle with the awareness that something behind those eyes was paying genuine attention. That night he dreamed for the first time in the strange way he would come to know over the following weeks. Not his own dreams, or not only his. Vast open sky, blue-black and endless, with other shapes moving through it that were large and winged and alive. Heat rising from stone, the smell of something he had no word for, and a feeling, not fear, not joy, something older than both. He woke before first light. Sable was curled around him in the dark, awake, watching his face with both eyes. Reed sat up slowly. He put his hand on Sable's head. The scales were warm. The presence he felt, that open-door sensation, was there again, closer than before, like something that had been standing in the hallway had quietly stepped into the room. "What are you?" he asked, not expecting an answer. He didn't get one, but Sable pressed forward against his hand, and the image that came was not a dream this time. It was clear, like a photograph, Reed, kneeling in the rubble of Firebase Dun, seen from the creature's own eye level, small and scruffy and ash-covered, and absolutely refusing to leave. Reed stared into the dark for a long time after that. Farrow brought his archive findings to Reed the next morning over bad coffee and good intentions. The xenolinguistic record had expanded. He had found a second source, older than the first, that used the word Veyrath in a different context, not as a name for the species, but as a description of a role. "A witness," Farrow said, "not someone who watches, someone who is chosen to see. There's a distinction in the source language." He looked uncomfortable with what he said next. "The record suggests the Veyrath don't bond by accident. They choose. It's deliberate." Reed looked at his coffee. "How old is that record?" he asked. "Old enough that the species writing it doesn't exist anymore," Farrow said. The conv kept rolling. Tilek was 4 days out. The supply drop was in 3. That evening, Orvath found Reed sitting outside his tent, Sable beside him, both of them watching the volcanic horizon glow with the slow orange light of whatever was moving beneath Saratha's IV's surface. The commander sat down nearby, which he had never done before. He sat in silence for long enough that Reed stopped waiting for him to speak. "I did not file the report," Orvath said finally. "I want that noted." "Noted, sir." Another silence. Orvath looked at Sable. Sable did not look back at him. "Tilek arrives in 4 days. He stood. "I have no further information to offer." He walked away. Reed watched him go. He did not know what to do with that exactly, but he kept it. He had a feeling he was going to need every small thing he could hold onto. High Warden Tilek arrived without drama. No large escort, no official ceremony, just a mid-sized shuttle that landed at the edge of the camp with the quiet confidence of someone who did not feel the need to announce themselves because they already knew what the answer was going to be. He was Vale, a tall, thin species with smooth, pale skin and wide eyes that caught light in a way that made them seem permanently calm, permanently certain. He had been administering coalition Outer Rim territories for longer than Reed had been alive. He had a file on everything. He carried himself the way old bureaucrats do, like a person who has learned that patience always wins because it is never in a hurry. He found Reed at the edge of the supply yard. He introduced himself by title only and did not offer to shake hands, which was fine, and then he explained the situation in plain, clear language, which Reed respected even as he hated every word of it. Sable was a coalition natural asset under Emergency Preservation Statute 7. The statute was written over 200 years ago to protect species with fewer than 200 confirmed living members. Its intent was conservation. Its method was seizure and controlled preservation. Tilek did not need Reed's approval. He did not technically need Orvath's either. "Where will you take it?" Reed asked. Tilek named a facility on a station near the inner systems. Research staff. Controlled environment, nutritional monitoring. He said the word comfortable twice. "Will it be alone?" Reed asked. Tilek paused. It was short, barely a beat, but it was there. "It will have the full attention of the research team." "That's not what I asked." Tilek looked at him with the infinite patience of someone who had answered questions from soldiers before. "Sergeant Calloway, I understand that you have become attached. That is a human quality I have encountered often, and I do not dismiss it, but attachment does not generate legal standing. He then outlined the transfer timeline, 3 days. Reed said nothing. The squad heard about it in the way squads always hear about things: fast, informal, accurate. Bodhi appeared first, leaning in the supply yard doorway with his arms crossed and his jaw doing the thing it did when he was unhappy and processing it slowly. Pharaoh came next. He had his field reader and a look of someone who had already decided what he was going to do next. Then Rinna arrived. Nobody had told Rinna to come. She came because she had been there for 11 days watching a wounded creature become something that did not match the word fauna, and whatever she had seen during those 11 days had rearranged something in the clinical structure. She kept her feelings inside. She spoke directly to Tilek, which surprised him. I treated this creature for infection and structural wing damage, she said, over 11 days. During that time, it demonstrated consistent recognition of individual personnel, voluntary social proximity, and organized response to communication. In my professional assessment, it is not behaving within the parameters of preserved fauna. Tilek was polite. He noted her assessment. He explained that behavioral observation in the field by non-specialist personnel did not override statutory classification. Then Sable crossed the supply yard. It had been sitting near the transport, watching. Now it walked, not running, not threatening, not performing anything, just walked, steady and unhurried, through the group of people and stopped in front of Tilek. It looked at him. It did not growl. It did not spread its wings. It simply looked at him with both eyes and the full, quiet weight of whatever it was. Tilek stepped back. It was a small step, 1/2 pace, but everyone saw it and no one mentioned it, and that silence said more than anything else. Tilek recovered quickly. He was very good at recovering quickly. He repeated the 3-day timeline and moved to leave. Reed said, "I'll be filing a formal duty of care claim, sir, under Article 12 of the Coalition Enlisted Personnel Accord." Tilek stopped. A soldier who provides documented emergency medical care to an injured animal in an active combat zone cannot have that animal seized without a mandatory 30-day review. Reed's voice was even and careful. "I have the field medic's treatment logs. I have witnesses. I have the timestamps from Firebase done." Tilek turned around. Reed met his eyes. "I looked it up 3 days ago. Article 12, subsection 4. My colleague helped me find it." He didn't look at Pharaoh, but Pharaoh stood a little straighter. The silence that followed was not comfortable for anyone, but it was most uncomfortable for Tilek, which was a new experience for him. "You understand," Tilek said, finally, very quietly, "that this changes nothing in the end." "It buys 30 days, Reed said, "sir." Tilek accepted the filing. He had no legal path around it. He told Reed, before he walked back to his shuttle, that the review would not change the statute and that emotional arguments did not hold weight in Coalition Administrative Court. Reed nodded, understood. After the shuttle lifted, Bodhi let out a long breath. Rinna uncrossed 2 of her 4 arms, which for her was close to celebrating. Pharaoh sat down on a supply crate and laughed once, short and startled. "I did not know humans read legal code," Rinna said. "We read whatever we have to," Reed said. He looked at Sable, who was still standing where Tilek had been. The gold-violet scales caught the low orange light of the sky. The creature turned, found Reed's eyes, and walked back to stand beside him. 30 days, not a win, not even close to a win, but Reed had not been trying to win. He had been trying to buy time to find one. He went to find a lawyer. The coalition advocacy lawyer assigned to Reed's case was named Pessel. Pessel was Gallon, 4-armed, fast-talking, permanently exhausted in the way that people get when they spend their careers fighting rules written by people who never intended to lose. He read Reed's filing and then sat in silence for a while, looking at the wall. "Article 12 is real," he said. "The 30-day review is real, but I want to be honest with you, Sergeant. Administrative review boards in preservation cases have never ruled in favor of the claimant. The statute is 200 years old, and it has never been successfully challenged. So what do we do? Reed asked. Pessel looked at Sable, who was sitting beside Reed's chair with the still patience it had developed over the past 2 weeks. We need something that isn't an emotional argument, something legal, something precedent-based. He paused. Do you know anything about the Belloran ruling? Reed didn't. Pessel explained it. 40 years ago, a coalition court had handled a case involving a species called the Belloran, long extinct now, but at the time briefly rediscovered on a frontier world. The Belloran were classified as fauna. A researcher argued they were not, because they demonstrated something specific: bilateral cognitive bonding. Voluntary, mutual and structured, not training, not instinct. A deliberate choice made by both parties that produced measurable shared cognition. The court ruled that any species capable of bilateral cognitive bonding could not be classified as fauna. They were legally persons. The ruling had never been widely applied because the Belloran went extinct 18 months later, and there were no other known cases. Until now. If you could demonstrate that Sable is capable of bilateral cognitive bonding, Pessel said, in front of a judicial panel, the statute doesn't apply. Tilek loses his legal basis entirely. How do I demonstrate it? Reed asked. Pessel looked at him carefully. That depends on what you actually have. Is it real, Sergeant, the bond, or is this a smart animal that has learned to follow you? Reed thought about the dreams, the images, the night in the rubble when it had pressed its head against his knee, and something in him had opened that had not been closed since. He thought about waking in the dark to find it watching his face. He thought about the image it had shown him himself, kneeling in the ash, seen through its eyes. It's real, he said. On the 22nd night of the 30-day review, Reed stopped dreaming his own dreams entirely. The sky in the vision was huge. Not Sarath's IV's pale volcanic sky, but something older, bluer, enormous in the way that skis are when they have never had a ceiling. And standing in it, not flying, just standing in the air the way impossible things do in dreams, was a Veyrath. Old, ancient, actually, scarred across the chest and one wing. Scales that had gone deep amber with age, the violet faded to silver at the edges. It looked at Reed the way old things look at small things, not with contempt, but with the full understanding of the distance between them. Reed would call it Sovan later, though it gave no name. It simply showed him things. It showed him why the Veyrath had left. The early coalition expansion wars had come during a time when the Veyrath were widely bonded across dozens of worlds. Their bondkin, a species that no longer existed, wiped out in the resource conflicts of that era, were taken from them. Not one or two, all of them. The coalition had not known what a bond meant. They had not thought to ask. And the Veyrath, who did not make war and did not make noise, had simply withdrawn from a civilization that could destroy what mattered most without even understanding it, had done something wrong. Then it showed him what a bond was. Not attachment, not affection. A Veyrath chose a witness, someone who would see them fully, not manage them, not study them, not preserve them in a controlled environment, simply see them. And in being seen, the Veyrath became more fully themselves. The bond was not ownership from either side, it was mutual recognition. And then it showed him what happened when the bond was broken by force. No violence, no rage, just a slow, complete fadding. The records from old research attempts were clear on this. Veyrath in captivity did not die of poor conditions. They died of the particular grief that comes from being truly known and then separated from the one who knew you. Every research facility that had ever captured one had noted the same thing without understanding it. Reed woke up with his hand already on Sable's neck. The creature was awake, watching him, calm, patient. It had known what was being shown. I understand, Reed said to Sable, to the dark, to whoever Sovan had been. He got up and went to find Pessel. He told the lawyer everything, the bond, the images, the shared dreams, what Sovan had shown him. Pessel listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. Then Reed told him about the Belloran ruling again from his own angle. Bilateral, mutual, measurable. You said we needed to demonstrate it in front of a panel. Pessel was quiet for a long time. To satisfy the Belloran standard, we would need to show that Sable communicates structured intentional information to you, not just behavioral response, but organized, chosen cognition, shared mental content, and we would need equipment to measure it. Can you get the equipment? I can get the equipment, Pessel said slowly, but Sergeant, if this doesn't work, Tillek takes Sable the day after. I know, Reed said. He walked back to where Sable was waiting, 8 days left. He sat down beside the creature and put his hand on its head, and the gold-violet scales caught the dim light of the lamp and held it, and Sable closed its eyes halfway and leaned into his palm. We're going to have to show them, Reed said, what we have, what's actually happening between us. Can you do that? Sable opened one eye, blinked slowly. Reed exhaled. Okay, 8 days, let's get ready. The review chamber was a converted briefing room. 3 judges, 1 Dreth, 1 Vale, which made Tillek uncomfortable in a way he didn't show, and 1 Gallon, who had been reviewing coalition legal disputes for 40 years, and had the face of someone who had heard every argument twice and remembered all of them. Pessel stood to one side with his equipment set up on a small table. Tillek stood to the other with his legal representative, a quiet Vale who had filed counter-arguments citing species rarity and coalition preservation mandate. 1 day left on the 30-day review. Reed stood in the middle of the room. Sable stood beside him. The lead judge, the Gallon, whose name was Orcs, read the filing. He read the counter-filing. He read the Belloran ruling citation. He asked 2 questions of Pessel about equipment calibration and received 2 precise answers. Then he looked at Sable for a long time with the careful eyes of someone deciding what category to put something in. We will conduct the demonstration, Orcs said. Sergeant Calloway, you will leave the room. The subject remains. Reed looked at Sable. Sable looked back. Okay, Reed said. He walked out. The door closed. Inside the chamber, Sable stood still. The judges watched it. Tillek's representative made a quiet note on a data pad. The equipment on Pessel's table was running, a cognitive mapping array, calibrated for multi-species neural output, the kind of device that research teams used when they needed to determine whether what they were observing was structured thought or biological reflex. For 3 minutes, Sable did nothing. Then it turned toward the door Reed had walked through. And it began to communicate. Not in sound, not in movement. The cognitive array lit up with organized, structured output, patterns that the machine recognized as intentional signal, the kind that brains produce when they are not reacting to something, but choosing to transmit something. The array began mapping what was being sent. What it captured, and what Pessel printed and handed to the judges in real time, were images. A collapsed storage block on a bombed-out planet, ash and dark and cold, a beam across a torn wing, and a human, small, tired, absolutely not leaving, crouching in the rubble, wrapping a wound with the wrong tools, talking in a low voice to something that was too hurt to answer. The room was very quiet. The images kept coming, 11 days of them, the medic station, the convoy, the supply yard. In every image, the human was there, not commanding, not owning, simply present, simply refusing to be anywhere else. The last image was different. It was Reed's face, seen from a few inches away in the dark while he slept. And the feeling attached to it, which the array could not fully measure, but registered as sustained, voluntary, organized emotional signal, was not what animals feel for the people who feed them. It was the feeling of being known. Orcs requested Reed return to the chamber. Reed walked in. He looked at Sable. Sable looked at him. Something settled in the room, like a sound that had been ringing very quietly stopped. Orcs said, "Did you train this creature to do what it just did?" Reed said, "No, Your Honor, I just didn't leave." The panel deliberated for 6 hours. Reed sat outside with the squad. Bodhi brought bad coffee and nobody complained about it. Pharaoh read nothing. Rinna sat with her forearms folded and said, at one point, to no one in particular, I should have refused to treat it. On principle, a pause, I'm glad I didn't. At the end of 6 hours, Oris called them back. The ruling was careful, precise, and complete. Sable, and by legal extension, all confirmed living Veyrath, did not meet the criteria for fauna classification under Statute 7. They met the criteria established by the Belloran ruling for cognitively bonded persons. The preservation statute did not apply. The seizure order was voided. A full species review was to be opened, with interim protections in place. Tilek listened to the ruling with his hands still and his face composed. He was very good at composed. When it was done, he gathered his materials and moved to leave. He stopped beside Reed. When it stood before me in camp, Tilek said quietly, the day it walked across the yard, I felt something. His voice was measured, careful. I did not understand what I was feeling at the time. A pause. I believe I do now. He left without another word. Reed stood in the doorway of the empty chamber and breathed out slowly. Rinna told him that evening that Sable's wing had fully healed, fully functional. The creature could fly now if it chose. Reed looked at Sable. Sable looked at the sky, Sarath's IV's low, orange-dark sky with its thin scatter of stars behind the volcanic haze. He opened the tent flap. Sable walked out. It stood in the open air and spread its wings for the first time since the rubble of Firebase done, gold and violet, bright and wide, catching the firelight from the camp. It was bigger than it had been. It was going to keep getting bigger. It lifted, one strong movement, quiet for something its size, and it rose into the dark. The squad watched. Nobody spoke. Sable climbed to the height of the tallest structures in the camp, circled once in the dark sky, and came back down. Landed beside Reed, folded its wings, and sat down. Bodhi said, eventually, guess it's staying. Guess so, Reed said. That night he filed his after-action report. Standard format. It took him a while to write the last line. He rewrote it 3 times before he got it right. It read, subject is not fauna, subject is not a weapon, subject is a witness. As of today, so am I. He sent it before he could change his mind. Sable curled beside him in the dark, its breathing slow and steady, gold-violet scales warm against the cold air of the volcanic night. The bond was quiet the way it always was when neither of them needed to say anything. Reed put his hand on its neck and felt the familiar weight of being chosen, of having been seen fully by something ancient and alive, and having chosen to see it back. He did not know what came next. He knew there would be lawyers and rulings and politics and species reviews, and probably more arguments than he had patience for. He had started all of it by refusing to walk away from a sound in the rubble. He would probably do it again.